I'm Alamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. This week, the art world is mourning the death of Richard Serra. Richard was an American sculptor who was widely acknowledged as one of the greatest of his era. He died on Tuesday at the age of 85. We should say that Richard is best known for these gigantic steel sculptures that feel like they could swallow you whole. The one that I'm most familiar with is the one that you might also know, too. It's an installation called Tilted Spheres. And maybe you don't know it has a name, or you don't know what you're even walking through, or that it's a work by Richard Serra to begin with. But if you've ever passed through Terminal 1 at Toronto's Pearson International Airport, you've definitely seen it. It looks like a giant, basically this enclosure where this massive space suddenly kind of narrows. But there's another Richard Serra piece that is a little bit north of Toronto, near King City, a huge installation that a lot of people don't necessarily know about because it's technically not open to the public, but has local heritage status. It's called Shift, and it is a massive concrete sculpture that Richard built in the early 70s. Writer Sean McAuliffe has called it the closest thing Southern Ontario has to a Stonehenge. But this is not a typical tourist attraction, let's say, because to see Shift, you got to walk through some farmland near King City, Ontario. My CBC Radio 1 pal, Lise Hosein, is among the folks who have made that trek. She's here to talk about that experience and also Richard Serra and why he's so important. Lise, good morning, friend.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm happy that you're here because this is your world and I'm really excited to hear about it. So let's start with maybe talking about Richard Serra. He's someone whose work has been shown at the biggest, most important galleries in the world. We're talking about the MoMA, we're talking about the Guggenheim in Spain. So how did one of the most celebrated American sculptors of his time end up laying down these slabs of concrete in a farmer's field north of Toronto? How did this happen?
Yeah. In 1970, Serra asked to visit the land of this art collector named Roger Davidson that was in King City. I believe at the time it was a potato field. And so he went there with an artist named Joan Jonas, and they walked this clearing. And as they walked, the topography of the land is such that there are points where you kind of can't see each other that well, and then you reappear. So they walked to the farthest point in the field at which they could still see each other. Mm-hmm. And Richard Serra built his installation Shift around that experience, around that walk.
Being able to see each other the whole time.
Yeah.
Describe the landscape around Shift. So how do you get to Shift? What's around it there?
I mean, if you're going there, allegedly, as I did, the landscape, there's a subdivision that borders Shift.
Yeah.
But between the subdivision and Shift, there's kind of marshy land. There's farmers' fields. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of bees, burrs. But it opens out into this clearing where if you know what you're looking for, you'll see Shift. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what you're looking for, you might just think you're in a field.
I'm fascinated by the idea of a lot of people just passing by it and not necessarily knowing the thing that they're actually staring at. You know, like the idea of it's there for you to look at because you know that it's there. But if you don't know if you don't know that it's a piece of artwork at all, what would be your relationship to it? Like, what would you see when you arrive on the site?
Well, I like that Sean called it our Stonehenge because I think it would seem like a very mysterious set of two concrete walls just sort of emerging out of the ground. Yeah. But, it's something that I think Richard Serra certainly meant for us to see it. Now you're not supposed to see it. It's on private property. Right. But I think it feels like a real part of the landscape. So if you know what you're looking for, it's quite meaningful. And if you don't, maybe quite mysterious.
So you get to this installation, allegedly, through whatever paths you took to get there. When you see it, how did it make you feel? How do you experience that installation?
I think part of the process of getting there, because if you do decide, don't go there. But if you do go there, it takes a little work to get there. And then you emerge into this clearing. There are trees with whooping cranes nesting or blue cranes, I'm not sure. Yeah. So there's a real peace in the space. There's something that feels quite magical about it. And as you walk along these walls, you're really taking that same path that Serra and Joan Jonas took. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of history. And also you feel the time that's passed. The concrete walls that rise out of the ground are, they've taken some wear and tear over the years. So you really feel that sense of the time that's gone by. It's a kind of a magical experience.
It sounds like a pilgrimage. What compelled you to make the pilgrimage?
So I'm an art historian by education. So Mr. Richard Serra has kind of loomed large in my life. And I'd always heard that this installation existed. But I didn't know where it was, and it seemed kind of daunting to get there. So when I finally found it on Google Maps, it is there. It's a little dot. Yeah. It seemed worth it to try to find the way.
I was reading that Richard Serra himself compared museums to funeral homes. There's something about his work that is like basically begging to be structured out in the world somewhere, like Shift, like his installation at Pearson Airport, which is basically like squeezed in the middle of a bunch of stores, right, and the terminal. But one of his most controversial works is one called titled Arc. No, it's Tilted Arc.
Tilted Arc.
Tilted Arc, which was removed from a plaza in New York because there was so much outcry. Do you want to talk a little bit about the idea of Richard Serra making site-specific, art and what that means?
So, Richard Serra was always interested in the relationship of the work he was making to the place in which it was.
Yeah.
And so you can see his work in museums, certainly, but sometimes seeing it kind of out in the wild creates a different experience. But I think the really special thing about Richard Serra when it comes to public or site-specific art is that it's easy, especially with abstract art, to not feel a relationship with it, to feel kind of like excluded from it.
Because it's largely conceptual, right? Like, yeah.
But I think with his work, just because of the scale of it and the material and the fact that you can walk around it or into it, it has this unique ability to create a really physical relationship with the viewer. It creates feelings, sometimes feelings of claustrophobia or feelings of being dwarfed. So I think that he had this unique ability to connect with people who maybe usually wouldn't have had that a relationship with abstract sculpture. Yeah.
I mean, the tilted art controversy is maybe the most fun to get into because, it's like this giant steel slab situation that ended up, splitting a plaza in half. And then there is such an outcry that there are public hearings to be like, all right, we get it. You made your point. This art needs to be removed, right? Like that's sort of how that unfolded.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and I think one of the great examples of like the people really coming out against a piece of like high art.
Yeah.
So Tilted Arc was in this plaza in New York. It actually went to a hearing, and people complained that it was hard to walk around, so they could no longer go straight through the plaza to get to the other side. You had to walk around this huge wall.
Yeah, which was maybe the point of the actual art piece.
Yeah, to be this thing bisecting this plaza. Yeah. During the hearings, there were many art heavyweights who were part of the hearings. There was a security guard who actually said that it was dangerous because it could make a bomb blast concentrated, which if you think about, Timothy McVeigh and what happened afterward, was it a valid point? I don't know, but it's interesting that it became part of the conversation. So it was a really contentious moment, I think, in post-minimalist art and in public art.
I think, to me, the idea of contentious, the idea of art as making you have some kind of reaction, that's what you want as an artist. You want some people to go, I have strong feelings and thoughts about the idea that you're putting forth in the world. When you think about Richard Serra's legacy, what do you think will be his impact?
I think Tilted Arc is key to his legacy because it really was this moment when art became such a huge conversation in everyday life. But I also think that his legacy is in how his art is able to connect with people. So if you think of Tilted Arc as one pole of his art where people were really coming out against it, and then you look at Tilted Spheres in Pearson where people want to be in that space. People want
to actually actively walk through it.
Yeah, it seemed like once he changed from these really angular forms to like things that were more curved, it was like Richard Serra giving you a hug.
Containers,
the softer side of Richard Serra. So there's really an emotional narrative arc through his work that I think is really important.
Lise, I appreciate you being here. Thank you. And I'm really happy to hear of this alleged pilgrimage that maybe never happened.
Yes, alleged.
Alleged.
Thanks, Salamine.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Lise Hosein is a senior producer here on CBC Radio 1 in Toronto. We were speaking about the late, great sculptor Richard Serra, who died on Tuesday. He was 85.
Summers and I'm not in my bed, on the back of the bus in a bunk with the band. Going so hard, gotta choose myself. Underpaid and overwhelmed. I might cook clean, but still won't fall. Still working all my life, you know. Only God knows, only God knows, only God knows. 16 carriages driving away while I watch them ride with my fears away into the summer sunset on a holy night on a long back.
Come on. 16 Carriages from Beyonce. We are mere hours. We are 16 hours away from the arrival of Beyonce's album that arrives tonight at midnight. I cannot wait. We are hearing that there's a Miley Cyrus collaboration, that we're hearing there's a Willie Nelson collaboration. Beyonce giving us a country album. This is a moment I've been waiting for a long time. We'll be talking about it on the show on Tuesday, so we'll see you then. In the meantime, that is it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to this show anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Instagram at ComMotionCBC. I'm Alameen Abdul Mahmood. See you next week.
It's been 38 summers and I'm not in my bed.